You're staring down a complex project. It's full of unknowns, and someone wants a deadline. How do you give them a timeline that isn't just a wild guess, but a real, statistically sound forecast? Well, you don't just need a plan. You need a way to navigate that uncertainty. Today, we're diving into PERT, the Program Evaluation and Review Technique, and we're going to tackle it just like a top-tier consultant would, by really mastering the framework to get a strategic edge.
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll talk about why PERT is such a strategic advantage. Then we'll deconstruct the framework. After that, we'll get into the secret sauce, the estimation method. We'll even apply it to a real-world case study, and then wrap up with the key takeaways for mastering your own project timelines.
Okay, let's get right to it. The answer first, as they say in consulting. What is the real value of PERT? Simple. It's a powerful statistical tool that gives you a realistic, totally defensible timeline for those projects where complexity and uncertainty are your biggest enemies. It's all about replacing, "I think it will take this long," with, "I can statistically show you it will take this long." So the formal definition is program evaluation and review technique. But the key word you need to lock onto here is statistical. See, other tools might rely on a single time estimate, which is often way too optimistic. PERT, on the other hand, embraces uncertainty. It uses a range of estimates, and that statistical backbone is exactly what gives it the power to cut through the fog of a really complex project.
Oh, right. Now let's break down the framework. To really master a tool like PERT, you have to understand its core components. It's kind of like popping the hood of a car. You need to see how the engine works so you can spot problems before they even start.
At its heart, a PERT chart is basically a visual map of your project. But as you can see, it's way more than just a to-do list. It forces you to be MEIS, that's mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, in identifying every single task. But the real magic, the real power, happens when you start mapping out the sequence and dependencies. This network of connections is what lets you find the project's critical path, and that's huge. The critical path is the longest chain of dependent tasks that determines the absolute minimum time to finish the project. Any delay on that path? Well, that means a delay for the whole project. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, but what about Gantt charts? It's a great question, and this slide really breaks it down. Look, it's not about which one is better. It's about using the right tool for the right job. Gantt charts, they're fantastic for visualizing schedules and managing resources on simpler projects. But when you've got a beast of a project with tons of dependencies and timing is everything, that's when PERT is the superior tool. Why? Because it's literally designed to find that critical path and manage all the uncertainty around it. All right, let's get to the quantitative heart of PERT, the estimation method. This is the secret sauce. This is what lets us take that vague, sinking feeling of uncertainty and turn it into a manageable, calculable variable. This is where we build our statistical case for our timeline.
Creating a PERT chart is actually a very logical process. First, you identify your big milestones. Then, you break those down into all the individual tasks you need to do. Next, and this is key, you map the dependencies between them. That's how you start to see that critical path. Then, you plot the chart. And finally, the most important step, the one we're about to double-click on, you estimate the time for each task.
So the estimation process kicks off with the optimistic estimate, or O. This is your best-case blue sky scenario. I mean, think about it. This is the dream, right? No one gets sick, the coffee machine never breaks, every piece of equipment works perfectly the first time. It's the absolute fastest a task could ever get done. It's not likely to happen, but defining this lower boundary is our first step. Next up is the most likely estimate, or M. This is our anchor to reality. Using your past experience, your data, what's the most realistic amount of time this task will take? Accounting for the usual little bumps in the road. This isn't a gut feeling, it's an informed judgment. It's the number you'd probably give if someone said, "Just give me one number." And finally, we've got the pessimistic estimate, or P. This is your Murphy's Law scenario. Anything that can go wrong does go wrong. Key people are on vacation, a critical piece of software crashes, the supplier is late. By defining this worst-case scenario, we're essentially stress testing our plan, making sure we have a complete picture of the risks so we don't get blindsided. So here's where it all comes together to create one really powerful number. The PERT formula calculates the expected time by taking a weighted average. Now notice this, the most likely estimate is weighted 4 times heavier than the other two. And that's the key to the whole thing. It grounds the final number in what's most probable.
For any stats nerds out there, this formula is basically a simplified way to find the mean of a beta probability distribution, which is just the statistical model PERT uses for task times. It's solid. Theory is great and all, but let's make this real. Let's actually apply this framework to a simple scenario, a burger joint trying to figure out how long a big complicated order will take. This is going to show you exactly how the formula turns a bunch of estimates into a plan you can actually stand behind. So first things first, the manager breaks the whole order down into its core tasks. Now think for a second about the dependencies here. You can't assemble the burgers until the patties are grilled, right? And you can't grill them until the ingredients are prepped. So that chain, prep, grill, assemble, that's looking like a potential critical path. But other things like cooking fries or making shakes, those can happen at the same time. Understanding that is everything for efficient planning. And now for the numbers. Let's look at grill patties. Best case, 15 minutes. Most likely, 20. Worst case, 30. We plug that into our formula. 15 plus 4 times 20 plus 30, all divided by 6, and we get an expected time of 21 minutes. We just do that for every single task. You see how this process turns these subjective guesses into objective, calculated times? Now think about this. If grilling the patties, which is on our critical path, gets delayed by 10 minutes, the whole order is delayed. But if preparing the shakes takes an extra 10 minutes, it might not matter at all because other things are still happening. That's the power of knowing your critical path. And by adding up the expected times for every task, we get a final data-backed number. The total estimated staff minutes needed for this order is 144.5. Now be careful, that's not how long the project will take. That's the total work effort. The manager can now staff the shift correctly, and by looking at that critical path, give a really solid estimate for when the entire order will actually be ready. Okay, let's bring it all home. What are the big strategic takeaways here? How does mastering a tool like PERT give you a real advantage when you're trying to manage not just a timeline, but project complexity itself? So what are the real strategic wins here? First, PERT forces clarity. Just the act of mapping out dependencies shines a big, bright light on hidden risks and bottlenecks before they have a chance to blow up your project. Second, it gives you confidence. You're not just plucking deadlines out of thin air anymore. You're actually calculating probabilities based on a sound model. You can walk into a meeting and say, we have an 85% probability of hitting this date. And finally, it gives you control. PERT isn't just for planning. It's a dynamic tool that helps you navigate complexity, make smart trade-offs, and communicate with your stakeholders with real authority. So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a question. Think about the projects on your plate right now. You know the ones, the complex ones with all the moving parts and the fuzzy timelines. Which one of those projects isn't just asking for another simple plan, but is actually demanding the rigor and the clarity that a PERT analysis can bring?